You're listening to Canary Cry Radio.
And this is where it gets a little bit strange.
A favorite theme of science fiction is the portal, an extraordinary opening in space or time that connects travelers to distant realms. A good portal is a shortcut, a guide, a door into the unknown. If only they actually existed. It turns out that they do.
How do we explain it? Questions and questions and questions, but then it becomes fascinating, a real mystery of the first order.
We're going to be talking about seeing into other dimensions. They're like portals.
We live in the three-dimensional world, but despite that, we actually view things to be two-dimensional. Take a perfect sphere, for example. If you're looking at a sphere, it looks just like a regular two-dimensional circle. The only way that you can tell it's an actual sphere instead of a circle is because of the hues of light on it. So just like in a two-dimensional world.
You see, Einstein's equations break down at the instant of the Big Bang and the center of a black hole. The two most interesting places in the universe are beyond our reach using Einstein's equations. We need a higher theory, and that's where string theory comes in. String theory takes you before the Big Bang, before Genesis itself.
See, there are many orbs in this room. I can see all these orbs, and orbs are obviously the first sign of a spirit manifestation.
I'm going to be talking to you about how to see multi-dimensional entities. Some people call them ghosts, angels, demons, whatever terminology you want to put to them.
I can believe that all the signs are pointing to the soon resolution of some of these open questions.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was quoting from the Septuagint version of the Bible where in Isaiah 13 he talks about these gates opening. A few verses later he starts describing the blood moons. He says this is happening during a blood moon period of time. So, yeah, everything that we would be looking for in the scripture seems to be percolating in the world today.
Here's Basil and Gons.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Canary Cry Radio. My name is Basil.
And this is Gons. Welcome to episode number 94.
94. Sorry. In case anybody hasn't noticed yet, for the past 2 or 3 episodes, I have really been down on my weather. Is that a thing? Down in the...
I don't know if that's a thing. You just made it a thing.
Weather? Something about weather not being good. No, but I've just been a little bit ill. So I thought I'd just mention that since this is like going on 3 episodes now of like groggy, kind of high on pharmaceuticals, Basil. Just
Pharmacia.
It's
just bad, Basil.
It's baby aspirin is what it is.
Yeah.
It's baby aspirin.
Yeah, I don't like any of those. I just don't like any
You don't like baby aspirin?
I don't like aspirin. I never take headache medicine. I don't take, I'll have throat lozenges if I have a sore throat. That's about it.
Pharmacia!
Altering my consciousness with the cherry flavor. Okay.
Okay. Anyways, so we got a call, which is code word for email, from our good friend Cris Putnam, who has a new book with Tom Horn, and that's what we're here for, everybody.
Yeah, and he's actually been on Coast to Coast recently, and he's been on Josh Peck's show, Stealing Our Thunder.
Yeah.
He's been on Midnight to Caravan to Midnight, whatever that John B. Wells show. So he's been out there doing his thing, but he promised us that there would be exclusive material just for Canary Cry Radio.
Canary Cry exclusive.
You should.
That's a new thing.
Yeah, well, no, not really.
That's a new Canary Cry exclusive.
Exclusive soundtrack.
Exclusive theme song. Okay, so there you go. Anything else, Gons?
Nope. Other than
I have a Facebook now.
That's right. I was going to say that.
I have a personal Facebook. So go to Facebook and search Basil, Basil Rosewater, which was my given name.
Your real last name.
That's my real last name. So go do that. Be my friend. I've been posting lots of limericks and other silly things, and also, all the stuff that you need to survive in the world. Just come straight to my Facebook page and you'll get it.
Right. Cool. So, yeah, look for Basil on Facebook. I have morphed the Canary Cry account into the Gons account.
The personal account, not the fan page.
Yeah, the personal. The fan page, look for the fan page, Canary Cry Radio. Go like it. It's definitely growing. But what we're doing is we're basically tag teaming now the page. And so now there's 2 outlets. So you won't miss it.
Yep, it's awesome. Go do it. Facebook.com, Canary Cry Radio, Basil Rosewater, Gons, Shimura, and other stuff. It's going to be great.
So anyway, yeah, let's get into the episode. No, nothing else.
All right. Go. Episode go.
When investigating and comparing the world around us with the supernatural aspects found in the Bible, most would suggest that there isn't much overlap. But our guest today says otherwise. Cris Putnam is a best-selling author who co-authored Petrus Romanus and Exo-Vaticana. He's also got his own book called The Supernatural Worldview, which has brought new perspectives on how the Bible is consistent with the realms of the paranormal and supernatural that we see all around us. But he's here today to discuss his latest work, once again co-authored with Tom Horn, called On the Path of the Immortals, where he investigated the reality of otherworld entities that have been a major part of recorded human history, and how the Bible is consistent, if not more revealing, of the nature of such realities. We would like to welcome back to Canary Cry Radio, Cris Putnam. Cris, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, Gons and Basil, it's great to be on the show with you. It was a pleasure to meet you guys up in Ohio last winter, and it's good to be back.
Absolutely.
You're one of the few that have seen Basil's, mug.
Oh,
yeah.
Boy. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And not only that, but he's calling into the show right now on his secret direct red phone Canary Cry phone line. So that will explain that. But anyways, Cris, thanks for calling in, buddy. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we got a new book out with co-written with Tom Horn called On the Path of the Immortals.
Ooh.
Oh, that was my Bible software kicking in.
I thought that was just like a theme song you were going to play for us.
That was the Logos Bible software initiation song. Yeah.
I thought you had a whole theatrical performance planned over the phone.
Right.
All right. Okay, so your new book, On the Road of the Immortals.
On the path.
Oh,
Come on, Basil.
I mess it up every time. Well, that's very fun. That sounds. Did you guys do a lot of traveling? That's on the.
Well, we did some. Yeah, we actually did. Tom took a research trip to the Four Corners area, which is the intersection of Colorado and Arizona and New Mexico and Utah over there, I think, and to visit the Navajo ruins around Chaco Canyon and look at some of the petroglyphs. And he met with an Indian medicine man and got a lot of interesting information. And, of course, Tom's talked about that quite a bit, and that's all available on the Internet now, either different interviews. But it's in Chapter 1 of the book, or 2. It's actually Chapter 3, yeah. And I think it's 2. And then my Chapter 3 is about my trip, and I went to the northern part of the same area in Sedona, Arizona. And when I say northern, I mean it's really the northern edge of the Anasazi Indian territories. This is a mysterious Indian tribe that basically vanished off the face of the earth about 1,000 years ago. And you know, there's all kinds of competing theories about why they vanished, but it is a genuine mystery where they went and why they disappeared so quickly. And, you know, we've talked about that in some of the other interviews. But in Sedona, I went there mainly because we were covering this idea of extra dimensions and perhaps, you know, parallel realities, other realms, and that there's this idea that there are portals or doorways or gates to these other realms. The Sedona area is actually very famous for having one of these areas. So,
right.
You know, after reading a lot of the literature, I decided to travel there. And it's also really a well-known area for UFOs and the New Age movement and all kinds of weird psychic phenomena and stuff like that. So I spent some time there and did some investigation and captured some video with some weird stuff and even got a photo of a UFO.
Ooh. How good is the photo? I mean,
well, it's, you know, you can link to it at my website, supernaturalworldview.com. I do have it posted there.
Okay.
Here's the deal. You know, if you look at my Facebook, there's a photo on my Facebook page of me standing with the night sky behind me and the stars are really bright. The way you take that photo is that I was standing there and my photographer, Chris Florio, you have to open the shutter of the camera and leave it open for 10 seconds. So he's like counting to 10 really slowly while I'm standing really still to get that photo. Well, while we were standing there in the desert, my wife was wandering around taking photos with another Canon camera, trying to capture some of these orb things that we kept seeing. Well, in one of the photos, we didn't even notice the UFO until we got back home like a week later. And in one of the photos, way up in the distance, you can see a tree, which gives you some perspective, which is really useful for a UFO photo because you can kind of get a perspective of what size it is. But way off in the distance, there's a really pointy triangle thing up in the sky. And it doesn't look like a conventional airplane at all. It's very pointy, almost looks like an arrowhead or something, but It's got little points of light. Now, that's posted at supernaturalworldview.com. And any of your listeners can go to www.supernaturalworldview.com and just look for the triangle UFO or search for that, and it'll pop right up. And I even have, there's a couple threads on it, and where I have one that's an analysis where I had a few people that are experienced in photography and Photoshop take a look at it. And, and got some different opinions, but, you know, I don't know what it is. That's why I call it a UFO. I don't, you know, believe that it's aliens or anything necessarily, but, you know, UFO just means unidentified flying object, and it's certainly that. It's unidentified and it's flying, so there you go. I don't know what it is, but a lot of people in Sedona do see all kinds of weird craft, and there's all kinds of, you know, lore about a secret military base, so it could be some kind of top secret thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks to me like the TR-3B, which is thought to be a craft that they developed in the 70s or 80s. Not a full anti-gravity, but with some, you know, anti-gravitic generators, it's able to decrease the gravitational force on the craft by like 85% or something, and then they use semi-conventional propulsion systems for the rest of, you know, the propulsion, which
I mentioned that craft in the book, and when I, you know, in my analysis of this photo. And the only thing is I've seen some video of an alleged TR-3B. It's available on the internet, and I'll share that with you later if you'd like. But this doesn't. The lights on this thing do not look like what I saw. You know, if the video I saw was really a TR-3B, this doesn't look the same.
Right.
Now, and I speculated it could be something like the TR-3B, but it doesn't look exactly like the TR-3B I saw because the TR-3B I saw had like 3 lights on each point of the triangle.
Right.
This is lined with lights on the sides. And so I don't know that it's the same thing. It could be the same sort of thing, but I don't think it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, maybe the same technologies that are employed, different crafts. If you, I know you've run across the Ben Rich quotes from a former, head of Skunkworks, and he talked about all these, we can take ET home to the stars and all these, kind of over the top quotes. So,
well, the main one was how do flying saucers work, and he said, "Well, do you know how ESP works?" And then the answer was, "Well, that's how UFOs work."
Right.
So it tells me that they're looking at something that is related to human consciousness, apparently.
That's fascinating. So
it is, especially in when you look at physics, and they've got this whole thing they call the problem of the observer. Is it a wave or is it a particle when they're looking at light photons? Apparently the observer, human consciousness, does affect physical reality in ways that we don't fully understand.
Yeah. So speaking of that, after you observed the UFO, where was your next adventure off to there with Mr. Tom Horn?
Well, just to kind of clarify that, we didn't really see the UFO when it was there. We saw it when we got home. But the main reason when I went there is this area called the Bradshaw Ranch, and it's really named after a cowboy. He was actually one of the Marlboro men in the old commercials, but he didn't smoke, so that's what explains why he lived so long. But his name was Bob Bradshaw, and he was a Hollywood stuntman, cowboy, and he had a ranch, literally the Bradshaw Ranch out in the desert of Sedona. It had one of those knockout kind of western towns where they used it for a lot of movies. Even Elvis shot a movie out there. So it had like a mock western town, and it was a working cattle ranch. Well, in the 90s, his wife at the time, her name was Linda Bradshaw, or Linda Ball was her maiden name, wrote a book with a guy named Tom Dongo, who was a paranormal investigator, called Merging Dimensions. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea behind that book was that they really believed there was some kind of dimensional doorway out there on that ranch. And the reason why they thought that was they kept seeing all this weird stuff. One of the main things they see are what we call orbs, these kind of circular floating balls that people capture in photos. A lot of people think they're ghosts. Some people think they are angels. And then the leading debunker will say that they're all dust particles or lens flare in cameras. Right. Now, I had usually kind of fell in the debunking category before I went to Sedona. I thought that most of them were dust particles or lens flare. And a lot of them are, frankly. A lot of the stuff you see on the Internet probably is that, because lens flare does cause it to look like orbs. So to eliminate that, I really wanted to use two high-quality cameras, cameras that are made well enough where they're not going to have lens flare. Most of your professional Canon cameras, you're not going to get that kind of internal. Lens flare really happens when a camera has reflections in the inside of it. It's really from a cheaply made camera. Right. But if you have two cameras that capture the same orb, then it's not lens flare. And it's not likely a dust particle either because of the angles. If you have different angles on the thing, it's not going to reflect in the same way.
Right.
So it's not going to be a drop of moisture on the lens. It's not going to be just a standard dust particle. It's not going to be, lens flare. So I wanted to set up two different cameras and see if we caught them that way to eliminate this idea, that it's a camera phenomenon. And, yeah, we did definitely catch these orbs on both cameras simultaneously, one running video, one running still photography. We caught them multiple times. In fact, the professional photographer I took, Chris Florio, actually saw an orb with his naked eye. Wow. We have a video of one that, that seems to move kind of in an evasive way. It moves kind of towards us, and then it like zigzags real fast and kind of goes the other way and just kind of fades into nothing. That's actually posted at On the Path of the Immortals Facebook page. So I did start a Facebook page for the book, and that video is loaded there, as well as one of the other ones that's more like a conventional, just kind of a ball in the air thing, and it's above, I believe it's above my head, and so there's one video that has my wife in it, and there's one that has me in it. At both times, you can sort of see this ball in the sky above our head, and it's not a star. And I can show you the sequence of photos, like we took still photos where you see 1, 2, 3. It's not in 1, it is in 2, it's not in 3. So it's not like a star or something like that above our head. There really was some kind of light ball flying around.
What do you suspect those are?
Well, there's different opinions, like I said, and from the one that seemed to move in an evasive way, that seems to be evidence of intelligence or some kind of sentience. It's not conclusive that that's the case, but it definitely seems possible. And when you combine that with all the other testimony of people that have been out to that same place where I was, who have seen these things, I think it is rather compelling that there is something going on. Now, I looked around. A lot of people think they're ghosts. A lot of people think they are spirits. L.A. Marzulli in his Watchers 1, filmed these things flying around the ECETI Ranch, which is Stephen Greer's little meditation compound. Stephen Greer being the UFO guy who has really combined the whole belief in aliens with Eastern meditation and Eastern spirituality. And, thinks that they're coming here to help us in our spiritual evolution, blah, blah, blah. And I would put a big Great Deception label on that, along with L.A. and other people. But, in one of the photos that L.A. took in the video, it looked like the orb actually entered into somebody and just kind of went in them and never came out. And, he speculated that might be some form of demonic influence or, spirit possession. So people associate them with spirits, with demons, and then you have people who associate them with the holy angels. There's a lady, Joey Pinkney is her name, and she has a website. If you can Google Angel Orbs Miracle, it'll pop up. She has photos of these orbs flying all around worship services while people are worshiping God in different churches, and just like orbs flying everywhere. So my working theory is that if we're really dealing with an intelligent entity with these things, that this is a form that spirits take when they're traveling about. And I don't think that you can identify them necessarily, because they all basically kind of look like light balls. So they could be angels, they could be demons, they could be perhaps spirits, or of humans or whatever. I don't know. But maybe in a spirit form, that's the way that things move around. And I've had several people, including some really high-profile people who I can't mention their names, contact me since this book has come out to show me orb photos. Now, some of them are really convincing. And, one of the really high-profile people is somebody that I've been on a show with, who everybody would know who I'm talking about if I was able to say their name, but he showed me some photos that were absolutely stunning. And I think these were definitely demonic entities in the orbs that he showed me. So my theory is that it's kind of a form that spirits can take to travel around. It's kind of like their little vehicle or whatever. However, they seem to. It's a form of energy, perhaps, something like that. So that's my working theory.
Well, it seems like.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like if they are sort of higher dimensional entities of some sort, to traverse into our realm, it would take on perhaps a light form. But at the same time, it's really interesting. Colossians 2 a couple times mentions elemental spirits of the world, and I feel like the orbs have association with the mythologies of fairies and gnomes and stuff like that. Is that something you've considered as well when you say just spirits in general?
Well, some translations will mask that elementary principles of the world, right? And, the word there is stoicheia, and that's a Greek term, and it's very clear from the ancient literature that Paul was talking about, spiritual entities. He wasn't talking about principles of the world, like in some kind of ambiguous sense. He was talking about real entities, and these were like demonic spirits in a lot of the literature of his day. So it's clear to me that that's what Paul meant. Now, this is the famous passage, "Don't let anyone take you captive by vain philosophy and empty deceit, according to the, elemental spirits of the world." Now, elementals, have all kinds of representation in the occult literature, and a lot of people would say that these are what some of the so-called aliens are, and I think that they probably would fit into this broader category of spirit beings. So, I think there definitely would be a connection there.
Also, with the orbs, it kind of reminds me of the 2D land that we talk about with
Flatland,
right? With Josh Peck, where these. I
actually read about that in Exo-Vaticana too. The whole idea being, if you were a two-dimensional stick figure on a piece of paper, and that was your universe, it'd be really easy for a three-dimensional entity to manipulate your whole reality in ways that you couldn't understand. And I think that offers a lot of explanatory scope for the sorts of behavior that we see with things like UFOs that seem to defy, the known laws of physics by being able to take a right-hand turn at 1,000 miles an hour, which would, the G-forces would kill a human being.
Right.
It would actually, you can't do that. It would just destroy the craft. The physics don't even work. So how do we explain that sort of stuff? Well, that is one of the leading explanations, is that perhaps they are taking advantage of an extra dimensionality, and we can't really see the full movement that they're doing. And maybe they're absolutely leaving our four-dimensional space-time and coming back in. So it only appears to us that it's a 90-degree turn. For them, maybe it's not. It's sort of analogy like, if you were that stick figure on that piece of paper universe, and somebody stuck a pencil through it, what would you see? You'd see a little point. You'd see it get up to a certain size of a round ball. The round ball would stay there for a while, and then it would just vanish as the eraser popped through.
Right.
The whole time you'd have no idea that a pencil just went through your universe.
Right.
Absolutely. And speaking with that, you said in Sonoma, did you go visit those like weird portal sites that they have set up?
Right. So I went to an area, right outside the Bradshaw Ranch, where everyone has written about all this weird stuff. Linda Bradshaw, claimed to have seen UFOs, orbs, Bigfoot, little beings, little strange beings running around, just all kinds of weird stuff. Now, the thing that's interesting to me is that it's not just her. If you start looking through the literature where people talk about these sort of areas, you get the same story every time. And like the Skinwalker Ranch, that's famous from coast to coast, I think that it's been publicized quite a bit. A lot of people probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You can Google that. But same kind of thing: UFOs, strange creatures, cryptids, weird. Weird alien type beings, Bigfoot, the same sort of story. Well, what I found even more fascinating is that, so you have all these modern accounts of these portal areas where these weird creatures are there. And then if you look in the Bible, in Isaiah chapter 13, in the Septuagint version, and 13 is talking about the destruction of Babylon and the day of the Lord. And it says, "Open the gates, ye rulers. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath." It sounds like, it's opening. God's saying, "Open the gates. Here come the giants." So what are the gates they're talking about? Well, I think that's likely the same sort of portal thing that we're talking about. But the thing I found really most fascinating is that at the end of that chapter, it's talking about after this judgment that the only things that will be dwelling in Babylon will be satyrs, which are basically half human, half goat beings, and monsters, and all kinds of strange, cryptid, little strange beings, monsters, devils. It just depends on what translation you read, but it's really clear that these gate areas, like in Isaiah 13, are also associated with weird beings, demonic entities, giants, the same sort of stuff that you see in the New Age literature and in the paranormal literature around these gate areas, strange creatures, UFOs. And I don't think that's an accident. I think there is some sort of underlying reality behind all of that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, that chapter with Isaiah 13, because, it mentions the mountain, which I know you've talked about the mountain and its correlation to gateways or portals. But it also talks about both the Lord's hosts, coming for battle from the ends of heaven, which, what's that mean? Does that mean all of space, all of the universe? It's kind of an interesting sort of exercise of trying to consider what that means in terms of heaven. Is it just another dimension? But it all seems like it's coming to fruition. It's the battle is all converging on earth, so to speak, so it's really a very telling chapter that people often, I don't think, really consider. And I'm trying to find that piece. I think there's a word in here that talks about it, how the dead are stirred up or something like that. And that word in the Hebrew comes from that same word anakim, which means, like death. So even that, the connection there with the Nephilim by itself without even having the Septuagint translation. So it's pretty interesting stuff there.
Absolutely. It really is. And, again, I look at these relationships, between the sorts of things that we see described in these prophecies and then the sort of things that we see going on in the world and the things the paranormal community is talking about. And the fact that, they do seem to agree with one another, I think is quite telling of the fact that there is something real going on. And the whole idea of portals, that we've been discussing is really one of the major topics in the book. And the idea that these immortal beings, and that's just a term that I'm using for beings from this other realm who weren't created to die, and that's really what immortal means. That they have a beginning point, but they don't have an end point necessarily. And I think it's a much more accurate and descriptive term than angel, which is usually what people use. And that's just kind of a tradition that's developed. In theology, they even call it, the angelology, the study of angels. Well, I just don't like it because angel is a job description. It means messenger. And the word angelos in the Greek New Testament can be a human or a divine being. It's not necessarily, a divine being. It could be a human being. It could be an angelos. In the Hebrew, it's malach, same word, messenger. But, the seraphim that I was describing earlier, these plumed serpent deities that, are flying around the throne room of God in the beginning chapters of Isaiah, it says that they have six wings and they're singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." Those same beings are described later in Isaiah as fiery flying serpents. And, I think that betrays the fact that they are serpentine, they are reptilian, but, the holy ones fly around the throne of God. And I think it's curious to me why translators of the Bible decide to transliterate the Hebrew as seraphim when they're talking about the throne room of God, but yet later in Isaiah, when they see the same exact Hebrew, seraphim, they translate it as fiery flying serpent. Why is that? Well, I think that they're uncomfortable with the notion that serpents are flying around the throne room of God. So they kind of mask that, and they mask that in translation. They don't translate it when it's in the throne room. They just transliterate it and say seraphim. So no one really knows what they mean. But, when you see it later in Isaiah, it's fiery flying serpent, like it's scary. Well, I think they're probably scary in the throne room of God as well, but they just kind of mask that. I don't really appreciate it when translators, try to censor the Bible for me because they're afraid that it might scare me. I'd really like to know what it says rather than having it being censored in translation. I'm afraid that that's what's going on a lot of times with the term seraphim, because they really are serpentine, and they really do fly around the throne room of God. Yet, I think that, we see that there are fallen seraphim, and seraphim who has rebelled against God. We know that some of the angels did that, and we certainly see that there are places in our theology that would allow for that. Psalm 82 is one of these famous psalms, and it's one, Dr. Heiser has talked quite a bit about the divine council.
Yeah.
It starts out, God is taking his place in the divine council in the midst of the gods, little g. He holds judgment. How long are you going to judge unjustly? God is basically condemning these little g gods for mistreating the other nations. This is kind of Heiser's paradigm that he calls, I think, the Deuteronomy 32 worldview.
Yeah.
And basically the idea that at the Tower of Babel, God didn't just confuse the languages, he actually disinherited the other 70 nations that we see in the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. Now, that being the case, he put the other nations under the authority of these little g gods, and he took Israel as his own. And this makes a lot of sense of why God was so particular with the Israelites, because he really wanted them to stand out and be distinct amongst the nations. He wanted them to show, that he was the one true God by the way they behaved in opposition to these other nations who were under these other gods.
Right.
Now, in that psalm, Psalm 82, I think around verse 6 or 7, yes, verse 7, 6 and 7, I'll just read it. Let me look it up here. Okay. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. That's the ESV of that, verses 6 and 7 of Psalm 82. Mm-hmm. So he's saying you're gods, and, you weren't designed to die, but because you've done this, you're going to die like men. Now, the interesting thing is, some interpreters don't like the idea of little g gods, so they try to turn those into the Israelites, the leaders of Israel. But that doesn't make any sense, because why is it meaningful to tell a human that he's going to die like a man?
Right.
He's going to die like a man anyway, so how is that even a judgment? That makes no sense at all. So they have to be divine beings who were designed not to die, or that punishment doesn't even make sense. In Psalm 145, you see that God created them to live forever. It says the Malak and the Sabah, which is another Hebrew term. Sabah, it really means a military term. But he's talking about God has created, these beings that people typically call angels, but some of them are not messengers. They're military. This is what the Sabah is, and that's usually translated as hosts. Or hosts, Sabah, but that really is more of a militaristic term in Hebrew. So you have the Sabah, you have the Malak, and they're created not to die. But because these fallen ones have mistreated the nations that they were in authority over, God has sentenced them to die like men. Right. Now, do we see any evidence that there are, fallen angel deities, fallen, seraphim over other nations? Well, in chapter 4 of the book, I really did. I think I did probably one of the most thorough kind of encapsulations of this idea that in Mesoamerica, you see the people in the Incas in Peru, the Aztecs and the Mayans, all worshiping what? Plumed serpent deities, beings that are reptilian with wings, that are being worshipped as, gods like Quetzalcoatl. And what do they require? Well, it's interesting to me. They build pyramids just like the Egyptians, and then they require blood sacrifice to these flying plumed serpent deities. Now, I don't think that's an accident. I think that what we're seeing there are these flying fiery serpents from Isaiah. These plumed serpent deities are fallen seraphim or something related to the seraphim. I don't know that God has actually told us about everything that he created. Perhaps, we see the cherubim, we see the seraphim, and we see the angels that appear to be human, but the cherubim and seraphim are definitely not human looking necessarily, and they're scary and they're fierce, and they're not something that you want to meet on a dark night in the woods. But they are the sort of things that people would fall down and worship as deities, in the Mesoamericans, and I think that's exactly what happened. That these entities showed up and said, I'm your God, I'm Quetzalcoatl, I'm worship me, and I think they did, and then they offered human sacrifice to them. You see the same sort of thing happened in Egypt. They built pyramids, they were worshiping snakes, and they developed this whole pantheon. But I think at the core of it, there probably is an underlying reality that is one of these fallen angel type beings. And I just say the word fallen angel because that's something everyone understands. Again, fallen immortal would be more accurate, and that's why we use the term immortals in the book.
Right. And, just real quick, if we go back to Psalm 82 and that passage you brought up, verse 6 and verse 7, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. One of the most compelling arguments for Jesus being Yahweh, in the flesh, is John 10:34. And I've heard so many New Agers use this passage to justify that the Bible teaches that humans are gods. But in reality, Jesus answers, and this is where he's answering the Pharisees. And Jesus answers, the Pharisees ask him, for a good work, we don't stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. And Jesus answers and says, has it not been written in your law, I said you are gods? And if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and the scripture can't be broken, and et cetera, et cetera. But he quotes Psalm 82, which is really fascinating because he's pretty much saying, I'm the one that said that back in Psalm 82. I'm the one that judges the gods. Right.
Well, he's saying you already believe in other gods. He's saying here's it is in your own Torah, in your Old Testament, your Tanakh, that there are these other gods. And I'm telling you I'm the Son of God. So why do you want to kill me? You already have room for this in your theology. Right. That's what he's saying. And it's funny that some of the apologists will quote that passage in John and try to say that that proves that they were ancient Israelites. How does that make any sense? Jesus is claiming to be God. He's not claiming to be a judge of the Israelites. He's claiming to be a God. So it's not even coherent to use John 10 as a way to refute that they're actually deities.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
I always like that, just in terms of the whole argument for, I guess the sons of God, perspective, the divine council, if you will, with Deuteronomy 32:8. And I think Dr. Heiser was the authority on that with, specifically with Deuteronomy 32:8, because if you go look it up, some of your translations will say, according to the sons of Israel, but I think Dr. Heiser does a good job.
That's nonsense. That's called demythologization. Demythologization is what that is. And Heiser does have a scholarly paper dealing with that passage in John 10, where he makes the same argument I basically just gave, where it's not even coherent for Jesus to be saying, you've already called these other humans God, so why can't you call me one? Because that would make Jesus no different than the Israelite judges, if that's the way you're going to interpret that. So obviously he's claiming to be God. He's claiming to be God. He's going, look, in your own psalm, here are other deities. So why is it so, crazy for you to hear me say that I am the Son of God? So that's really what that's all about.
Right.
And that's the argument. His argument only works if there really are other little g gods.
Right. Now, one of the areas that you really, and you've talked about this a little bit, but just looking at the Native American culture, it's very interesting to me that it's only now that we're starting to, bridge that gap of sort of their cosmology and some of their, I guess, theology even, and seeing the bridge or the connection points with biblical truths. And it's fascinating to me because it takes sort of this understanding of like the divine council and all this stuff that, has been uncovered in more recent years to sort of get that connection with the Native American cultures and what they were seeing and what they were experiencing. What else can you tell us about, some of those cultures that you thought were in line, but obviously they kind of had it, they had a different perspective, kind of a 180 to, the biblical view. But I mean, I don't fault them. If a serpentine shining being came down and said, I am your God, I mean, to a culture that doesn't know otherwise, sure, you're our God. You're far superior to us. What do you want? Right. And I guess there was human sacrifice involved and all kinds of stuff.
Right. Well, so the early Mesoamericans who were worshiping, these feathered serpents or whatnot, the tribes are like the Olmec, the Mixtec, the Zapotec, the Toltecs, the Aztecs. And, the Olmec times are go back to 1400 BC. So you're talking about the same time the Israelites were entering the Promised Land. And these feathered serpents, they're really depicted throughout North, Middle, South America. The Olmec or the Toltec culture, it's known as Teotihuacan, and it's displayed as a serpentine god on the sides of the pyramids. It's a pyramid called the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, and I think we have a picture of that in the book. I don't know if I can pronounce it right. It's Teotihuacan. I don't know. But the archaeological record is pretty clear, that the cult of the serpent spread all across the New World, and you have pyramids, dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, whatnot. The Incas of Peru, the Aztecs of Mexico, the Mayans of Yucatan, they all worshipped very similar winged serpent gods. The Incas called it the Amaru, the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl, the Mayans, Kulcan, so the Inca mythology, the Amaru is a huge, double-headed flying serpent that dwells underground and flies through all these tunnels, and it goes into the netherworld, blah, blah, blah. As a supernatural entity, it's reptilian. It was believed to navigate portals in the underworld. It communicated with the dead and the living. But the Amaru, interestingly, when you look at the leader of the tribe, the chief of the tribe, he was called Viracocha. Now, Viracocha was represented as a bearded man, but it's really interesting. Viracocha shows they had a thing called the Hunake, or a man-made double. It's representing the living king. He had some kind of symbol that represented him. What did he choose? a stone image of an Amaru. So the Viracocha adopted the Amaru as his man-made double. What does that mean? I don't know exactly, but it seems that the leader, Viracocha, they're basically their human-looking god is somehow intimately related to the Amaru. You see the same sorts of thing with Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec name, of the same sort of feathered serpent deity. One of the main gods of Mexico and Central America, the Aztec civilization. Quetzalcoatl, just was ubiquitous in the literature down there, and a lot of people have heard that name. And of course, the New Age community has really kind of brought Quetzalcoatl back as this big hope of the Mayan return, the glorious new age that we're going to enter into after, basically, they were saying 2012, if you listen to people like David Wilcock and whatnot. That's the thing I find really fascinating is you have this whole huge hoopla about 2012 and the Mayan calendar and the return of Quetzalcoatl, and we're going to ascend, and all these glorious promises and prophecies, and then nothing happened. But yet, David Wilcock's still popular. How does that work exactly? I don't really understand that. Because he just spoke at, the Contact in the Desert thing that it just had last week out in California, and apparently he's still really popular, but almost everything he said about 5 years ago turned out to be wrong.
Right.
And, why is that? In Christianity, we don't really do that. Like, I don't think Harold Camping has much of a following anymore. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, why is it that David Wilcock does? They just seem to be able to get away with it with impunity, making all kinds of predictions that don't come to pass.
Right.
According to them, Quetzalcoatl should have been back by now, but of course that didn't happen.
Maybe he's back hiding in the caves.
Yeah, maybe so, or he's invisible and we just can't see him.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that the Seventh-day Adventists and the Jehovah's Witnesses said about the investigative judgment, because Jesus was supposed to return in the 1800s, and of course he didn't. But some of them will say he actually did, but he's invisible and he's really judging the world right now. You just can't tell it. It's just kind of absurd.
He's very sneaky.
Yeah, very sneaky of him, wasn't it? It's funny how he said that when I return, the whole sky will light up and everyone on the earth will know it's me.
Right.
That's what he said. Don't be deceived. When the Son of Man comes, you're not gonna be doubting it.
Right.
But so the Incas, the same thing with Viracocha, like I said, and the Mayas had the Kulkan thing as well, another feathered serpent. And the other thing that really bothers me about how gullible New Agers are is, with this Quetzalcoatl thing, and they seem to be in love with this idea, but do they forget that the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas all practiced human sacrifice? Do they forget that they offered human blood to these deities?
Right.
And why is that something that you want to sign up for? I don't think it's a good thing. It really does seem to relate, to the same thing the Watcher angels were doing with the Nephilim, and Judd Burton's done a good job of attaching that to the practice of vampirism, and in his book Interview with the Giant. So you get all kinds of evil things of eating human flesh associated with these things. So why is this something that New Agers think is going to help us spiritually ascend? I just don't see it. It seems to me that they're going to put us into slavery. And,
right.
I think that's where that's heading. So, I don't know if these deities are going to show back up, but, I suspect they could. I suspect, when we get down to the day of the Lord, the return of Christ, the great tribulation period, when I suspect things are going to get super weird, a lot weirder than anyone probably expects. We see in the book of Revelation with that fifth trumpet judgment, these scorpion-tailed flying monstrosities with human hair and stuff flying around, stinging people for 6 months. That's at the fifth trumpet judgment in Revelation, but, it's not clear to me that everything is described. Maybe we'll have flying serpents flying around too, and we'll have giants and everything else that Isaiah talks about in Isaiah 13. I suspect it's going to get super weird, and all kinds of weird entities are going to pop up that people didn't even know existed.
Right. Now I'm pretty interested in these portals that you keep talking about, and you said there was a tribe that disappeared or vanished.
Yeah, the Anasazi, yeah.
Did they get sucked up into some other dimension by a serpent being who is...
Yeah, maybe something like that. So Tom, this was more with Tom's research trip. He went and talked to a Navajo medicine man, Dr. Mose, who did describe some of this stuff. So the Anasazi is this tribe that, just kind of vanished off the face of the earth. Well, the thing that's really weird is that, the ancient people, valued things like salt. Salt was something they used to preserve their food, and something they used to cure meat and all kinds of things. It was just about as valuable as gold to them. It was something they used to survive with. And when they look in the ruins of these cliff-dwelling Anasazi, they found that they left their tools. They left their salt, their bags of salt. They left things that, if they were making a migration to somewhere else because of a drought or a lot of the other reasons that, some scholars will give for where they went, they would have taken that stuff with them. The fact that it was left behind tells us that something a lot more drastic happened than a planned, migration.
Right.
There's been some really weird evidence that's popped up. There is evidence that some of these Toltec Indians who were known to be cannibals, some of these people that were worshiping Quetzalcoatl and Kulkan, that were also eating human flesh. There's some evidence that they came up and started doing raiding parties on the Anasazi, but they found human excrement, okay? Archaeologists found some petrified human poop, all right? Now, when they cut that open and they started investigating it, what did they find in it? They found human DNA from a different human in the human poop. It's telling us that they were eating humans, okay? So somebody was there practicing cannibalism. So they also found some evidence that the Anasazi, that some humans were just torn to shreds. I mean, literally, torn to shreds. They found their remains, splattered all over the place. So when Tom started questioning Dr. Mose about where did the Anasazi go, he first started giving him, the typical story that most scholars will give about how they migrated or how they kind of morphed into the Hopi and the Pueblo Indians and whatnot. And some of that might be true. Some of them might have done that. And I think that there probably is a trace of them within the Hopi tribe. But, something else happened as well. And Mose said, well, I shouldn't tell you this, but I will. And he kind of went off on the story about how a reptilian entity came through a portal and started basically eating them and attacking them, and they had to run. Yeah, and so this is right there in the Indian literature, and there's petroglyphs on the cave walls of a spiral which looks like the portal, the vortex portal, and then a huge reptilian entity standing next to the spiral, and then there's a six-toed footprint, which of course in the Bible we read about these giants that have six fingers and 6 toes, and that appears in the book of Samuel and in the Chronicles as well. So it seems to us that that there were giants there were reptilian entities that were attacking them. So I think something happened with the Anasazi that caused them to either to run or that they were actually destroyed. So it seems to us that a lot of what we see described in the Bible with the Nephilim and the giant tribes who were in the Promised Land when the Israelites came were also here in the Americas. So whatever the Watchers were doing in the Levant area around Israel, they seem to have been doing it over here in the Americas as well. We just don't have very good written records of it. But a lot of these tribal, stories that have been passed down through oral tradition do seem to preserve the same basic story, about giants, about reptilian entities who were attacking the people, and then we see them worshiping these plumed serpents like they were doing in Egypt and stuff. So it all does seem to form a coherent picture that is consistent with a biblical worldview.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That's cool that you guys got the chance to go on site there, Mr. Adventure Team style.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a privilege to get to do that, and I just want to thank Tom Horn for financing all that, and that it was my privilege to get to do that work.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Now, I have a question, and I want to get into CERN a little bit later, but Revelation 16:13 talks about 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs. Right. And do you think there's a connection there with some of the serpentine? I mean, frogs aren't exactly serpents, but they're still reptiles, right?
Well, they are.
Amphibians, gone.
Well, okay, that's why I have you, Basil.
Come on.
Amphibian, reptile, what's the difference? Not really. Okay. It's a little, it's a little unclear, when you're dealing with the book of Revelation and apocalyptic literature. Obviously, sometimes these words are symbolic of other things, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're literal. And it's not perfectly clear. I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon and out of the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet 3 unclean spirits like frogs. Okay? So I don't think they're literally frogs, right? Because they're coming out of the mouth of these guys, right? The beast would be what? The Antichrist, right? The false prophet would be his sidekick, and the dragon is the devil, right?
Right.
And so these 3 unclean spirits are coming out of their mouths. So what do they represent? I don't know. I suspect that these unclean spirits are just that. They really are spirits. There's some kind of entity who is, of demons, demonic entity, or a fallen angel deity, a fallen immortal deity. And these are going to go out throughout the world influencing political leaders. It says kings, but, in our day we would call these presidents, prime ministers, whatnot.
Right.
In Saudi Arabia, they probably do still call him a king. But, what are they doing? They're influencing these political leaders to prepare for the Battle of Armageddon. Basically, they're kind of pushing them on to a world war, or a war against God, really, is the way it really goes down. But, whatever the meaning of that symbolic thing, I think it is symbolizing something else, but I do think they really are spirit entities, and they probably do have a reptilian or amphibious look to them. But, the coming world government, the Great Tribulation, will be established by the power of Satan. It's pretty clear that happens. Right. So here, we have Satan, the world ruler, the false prophet, uniting in one goal to incite the nations of the world to gather for the final world war. And the war is really a form of rebellion against the world ruler, the Antichrist. I think they're turning on him, but why should the satanic forces let loose to destroy the world empire he just created? Well, the answer is probably related to Satan knowing that the second coming of Christ is near.
Right.
And he's going to gather all the military might of the world in the Holy Land, trying to prevent Jesus to return from the Mount of Olives. And that's discussed in Zechariah chapter 14. And really interestingly there, it says that Jesus is going to basically open his mouth and their faces are going to melt off of their flesh. It doesn't sound like much of a battle. It just sounds like he says drop dead and they basically melt right there. That's described in Zechariah 14 pretty clearly. And it's not a pretty picture for those people who are gathering to fight Jesus as he returns. So it seems to me that these unclean spirits are inciting these leaders, to gather for this big battle, perhaps against the Antichrist at first, but really the whole idea is Satan is using this as a means to try to prevent Jesus from returning, because he knows that marks his judgment and his chaining into the bottomless pit for 1,000 years.
Yeah, and it seems to correlate with, some speculations that I've made, and I'm not the first one to make this, obviously, but that, the return of Christ will be seen from a worldly perspective as some sort of alien invasion. That could be, these malevolent aliens are coming, and maybe it's going to be framed in a way that's opposite. So just some interesting stuff there. But I do want to get into CERN because I know that that's kind of a hot topic, and I've looked at CERN for a few months here, and
plus we've already been talking about portals.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of portal talk. What can you tell us about CERN, and how does it correlate with some of the research that you've done recently?
Well, one of the first chapters that I wrote on the path of the Immortals is called The Science of Portals. And that's because, Tom he says, I want you to investigate this idea of portals to other dimensions. And I'm like, really? Because, most of the literature on that, and a lot of it's just nonsensical, New Age kind of weird stuff. And, I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to have to parse through all this crazy stuff. And, I'm thinking, well, I'll start by just seeing what science says really is feasible. So I started investigating black holes and, Einstein-Rosen bridges and, all the stuff that you see in the movie Interstellar that came out last year. There really is some real science behind this stuff, and it's a legitimate topic in physics. Now, CERN is dealing with the really small. Where astrophysics is looking at things like black holes on a really big astronomical perspective. On the other end, CERN, we're talking about smaller than an atom. You can't see this stuff that they're doing there, but it kind of relates in a similar way in that they think that they could open up a really small black hole because they're colliding these particles at super high energies. And they actually, this is the mouth of the own scientists there at CERN. They said things like, we could tear the space-time continuum and create a black hole that could destroy the world. They actually said that, we could tear the space-time community and create a black hole which would suck our whole universe into it.
Right.
our whole, our galaxy or whatever, our immediate surroundings. I don't think that they necessarily really believe that, but they think it's on the table enough to mention it. It's not clear to me when they're being tongue-in-cheek and when they're not, and that's the problem, is they don't really make an effort to clarify any of that. They seem to enjoy scaring people, and they put the Hindu god Shiva out in front of the facility. Now, when they did that, Shiva, it depends on which form of Hinduism you're looking at, but typically Shiva, some people, the way they framed it at CERN is Shiva is the creator, but a lot of people in Hinduism view Shiva as the destroyer of worlds, and actually Shiva is both, because in Indian cosmology, they believe in an eternal creation. It's always been here, but it's cyclical. It's destroyed and then it recreates, it's destroyed and recreates. So they believe in this kind of cyclical version of time where it's all in cycles and it's always being created or destroyed somehow. And it all kind of fits in with the whole karma and the whole Indian cosmology where, nothing's really ever certain anyway. But when they did that, there was a young girl in India who really believed them when they adopted Shiva. And when they turned CERN on the first time, she committed suicide. So the things that they say, whether they're tongue-in-cheek or not, have real-world implications for real people, whether they know it or not. So these guys are, they're probably mostly secularists and atheists, and they think this stuff is funny. But it's not necessarily funny. Shiva is a real deity to Hindus, and this girl killed herself when CERN went online over that, because she really thought that it was going to mark the end of the world. And I really feel a lot of compassion for that. But who is Shiva? Shiva is this destroyer deity, with all these arms and. It's the one. What does she have? 6 arms or 4 arms? I can't remember. She has
6,
several arms.
I think. Yeah.
She has some extra arms there, anyway. But if you look at the statue in front of CERN, Shiva's doing like this cosmic dance, and they put this plaque on there about the cosmic dance of creation and recreation. And this is because a lot of the scientists now want to get away from the implications of Big Bang cosmology, because Big Bang cosmology tells us that the universe had a beginning.
Right.
And, bangs need bangers. And, things that begin need a creator. Nothing begins on its own. Something always puts it in motion. And they know that, and they don't like that because that has theistic implications. So what they really want to do is jump on board with this cyclical cycle of creation. So there's all kinds of theories now where the universe popped into being at the Big Bang, and then it'll be destroyed, and then it'll just cycle again, and it'll be another Big Bang. And so there's models in cosmology now where that's the case. So that's why I think they really adopted Shiva. But we know as Christians, as people who study the supernatural, that these deities like Shiva have some kind of real component to them. And Paul, when he was talking to the Corinthians, he was warning them about participating in idolatry and in pagan worship. And I'm just going to paraphrase the verse because I'm just doing it straight from memory. I tell you the things the pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, and I do not want you to be participants with demons. This is what Paul is telling the Corinthians, and that's just from my own memory of it. But what does that tell me? It tells me that even though these are idols, they're not necessarily real. There are demonic, immortal entities that will that are very happy to assume the identity of this idol and make it real for you. And I think that happens over and over again in these false religions. In Hinduism, they have 30 million gods, okay? 30 million. Now, are there that many demons for each god? I don't necessarily think that's the case. I suspect that there might be demons who will impersonate several of these characters. They might just kind of assume whatever role is convenient at the time. I think they're opportunists. I don't think there's necessarily a demonic entity for each of the 30 million gods in Hinduism, but I think maybe one of them might be 100 of those gods. There might be one demon who assumes all kinds of identities, just depending on what's convenient at the time. So I think that there is a demon that is behind the god Shiva. So whether the guys at CERN know it or not, they put a demon in front of their building and they dedicated it to it, all right? So, then they start making comments about, we might open a portal and something might come through. Right. Whether they're being tongue-in-cheek or not, people take this seriously because we do believe that there's a demon behind Shiva, and we do believe that a portal's going to open and all these, locust, scorpion-tailed beings are going to fly out at the fifth trumpet. This is in our worldview, and we think that these things will probably really happen. So the kind of things that they're saying aren't just tongue-in-cheek. They do have real-world implications, and, I think for that reason, they're being irresponsible in the way they're joking around about that stuff.
Right. Wasn't today the day that they pump up the juice over there at CERN?
I just saw an article today. They're taking it up to an energy level they've never been to before.
Right.
And they're gonna smack some stuff into each other and see what happens. And maybe they will create... Yeah, the thing is, this stuff is so small. Like I said, we're dealing with microscopic things. How could this create a portal that would really affect, our reality? That's where a lot of, I would call it the argument from incredulity. This just doesn't even seem feasible to be anything I should worry about. Well, the scientists are the ones saying that maybe you should worry about it. They've said things like, we could open a black hole and suck our, whole galaxy into it. They've made those statements.
Right. So
I'm not really afraid of CERN, but, I think that they're playing around with stuff they don't necessarily know what they're doing. And I don't find their humor all that humorous. In fact, in light of people committing suicide and the fact that they really are putting demonic entities out in front of the building, and it's not just a big joke. Now, the thing that's interesting about portals and science and wormholes and all that is that if you study the astrophysicists who really are looking at how could we make a traversable wormhole where we could fly a spaceship from one part of the galaxy to the other? Well, the main scientist dealing with that question right now is named Kip Thorne, and he was the advisor for the movie Interstellar. Now, Dr. Thorne will tell you, if you're going to try to make a traversable wormhole, you have to start at the quantum level, all right? So the work they're doing at CERN really does affect how you would make a portal to another part of the universe, because the only way to do it is you'd have to make a really small wormhole, okay, by tearing space-time, like I said, and then stretch it up to the size of the astrophysics level. And so they really are related in that way. And Kip Thorne and all the scientists who really look at wormholes would say that. That's where I got that idea from. So that is absolutely the case. So the work they're doing at CERN is intimately related to any sort of wormhole navigation that will ever occur if it does through a scientific means.
So, but one of the questions that we always try to ask with anyone concerning the topic of CERN is like, what's kind of the stated purpose? I mean, at a certain point, it's like, they spent close to $8 billion to build the thing. They're, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, we're trying to understand the fabric of reality. Is it just a natural progression of material sciences and where it's headed in terms of some of the things you've talked about with the supernatural worldview? I mean, do you think there's going to be a shift in the scientific paradigm through something like CERN?
Yeah, I don't know if CERN will be the impetus for it. I think it's already occurring. I think materialism is basically dying due to the weight of the evidence. And the reason I say that, is things that, like I mentioned earlier, the observer problem. When they look at particles like a photon, and they put it through like the 3-slit experiment, and is it a wave? Well, if you don't observe it and it goes through, it looks like a wave. It creates an interference pattern on the wall behind it. But if you look at it as a particle, it only goes through one slit. So which one is true? Well, it seems to be that both are true. It's a wave. It goes through all 3 slits, and it is a particle. It only went through one. But that's a contradiction. Well, that tells us that we don't really understand what's going on, because contradictions aren't true. It can't be both. But somehow it seems to be. Well, the problem is that it seems to us that way because we don't understand what's going on. And that's why they've postulated all these extra dimensions and things of that nature. They're trying to explain this stuff. The whole deal with Schrodinger's cat. Is the cat alive or is the cat dead? Well, it's in a superposition where it's both alive and dead. Well, we know that can't really be true, but it seems to be the case until you open the box. So something about the observer, the fact that we look at the cat will determine whether it's alive or dead with Schrodinger's cat, or the fact that we look at the particle will determine whether it's a wave. Or these are fundamental problems that they don't really grasp, and so the level of understanding that's necessary seems to escape us. And I think that we are dealing with something that's outside of our capabilities at the moment. I think God might be kind of having a chuckle that they're calling the Higgs boson the God particle.
Right.
And I think that's probably blasphemous on a number of levels. But the fact that they've built this huge facility, it's almost like rebuilding the Tower of Babel in a way. And I think that's a very apt analogy. Mankind has reached its peak of technology. We've come together where we all speak the same language. We're all connected on the internet. We've really undone what God did when he dispersed the nations at the Tower of Babel. And now we're all going to come together and build this huge machine, the most expensive, powerful machine ever built, and we're going to find the God particle. It really sounds like the Tower of Babel, doesn't it?
And we'll take a wormhole to heaven.
So, on one end of the spectrum, I'm all for it. I think it's great that we're doing science. We're trying to discover the fundamental building blocks of reality. I like that. I find I'm very interested in that. I think that, science is a worthwhile endeavor. Yet, at the same time, I'm very concerned because the scientists that are doing it don't have any respect for what they're dealing with because they're atheists, a lot of them. Most of them are. And they don't think that there are any implications to a lot of the things that they say and do that are blasphemous, that are demonic, that result in people committing suicide and whatnot. And this is this cavalier attitude of, we're the epitome of creation. Our scientific minds, our trained mathematical geniuses that are working at CERN, they know better than the rest of us, and we're just a bunch of primitive, superstitious supernaturalists, and and they just assume that naturalism is true, and they're wrong. And the fact is, when I say materialism is dying, I think they know that because there were scientists, when in Copenhagen and when they first started discovering all the stuff about, particle wave duality and things of that nature, people killed themselves. I mean, some of the scientists actually committed suicide because they couldn't make sense of this stuff. And because when you look at a materialist worldview, it doesn't make any sense how that could possibly be. But when you start looking at, things of a spiritual nature, some of the stuff really does start to make sense. And you start to see that, we're dealing with the science of the miraculous, and it's not going to make sense given naturalism. It's not going to make sense given the materialist paradigm, which says everything consists of matter. Well, they know that's not the case. Everyone's heard the thing, you bang on the table and you say, this is mostly empty space.
Right.
Well, that's true. That really is true. It's not really a solid table at all. It is mostly empty space, and the solidness is really like an electrical simulation. It's really, it's electrical forces that seem to be, repelling each other, and it's not really solid. So, a lot of what we assume is reality is really kind of a simulation. It's not really what we think it is. And so this idea that materialism is an exhaustive explanation for the universe is starting to become laughable to me. I mean, I don't understand how anyone could really accept it. There's something to everything in reality that's more than it seems. But when you start dealing with humans and human consciousness and our souls, it's obviously not true. We're obviously not just matter in motion. We have things like intention. The fact that you can think something and then make it happen in the real world tells me that materialism is false, because, matter doesn't have ideas. Matter doesn't have intention. If we were just matter in motion, then what we call in philosophy determinism would be true. Everything would be determined by the laws of physics, and your intent wouldn't have a thing to do with it. You wouldn't have any intention. That would just be an illusion. And if you read some of the prominent atheists, that is actually what they believe. They think that everything is determined. And, it kind of blows my mind that somebody like Richard Dawkins has a worldview that amounts to determinism, yet he still thinks that it's a good idea to write a book to try to convince me that my worldview is wrong. But, if determinism is true, he can't convince me of anything. He can't change my mind. It's all determined. It's just like water flowing out the end of a pipe. There's nothing you can do to change it. It's all determined. And so the whole worldview behind the project of CERN is wrong. It's fundamentally flawed. It's fundamentally deterministic. It's fundamentally materialism. And so they have the wrong worldview. And that makes them dangerous in a lot of ways that, we've already discussed. And that's what concerns me the most, is that we have people that are doing this stuff. They don't have any respect for what they're really doing.
Ooh.
Lay down the hammer.
Yeah, I was going to say, that was some serious business there, mister. No, but absolutely. And that was a very well articulated way to put it. It's actually a lot more intense than a lot of people know. So we're on the path of the Immortals still.
Did you find them?
Did you find the Immortals?
That's a good question. Yeah, did you find the Immortals? Yeah, I don't know, man. Were those orbs that we took pictures of out in Sedona Immortals? Maybe. I don't know. They're definitely weird, and it's definitely, I wasn't expecting to get that stuff the way I did on film. I don't know if I found them or not, but maybe. I think that we definitely got on their path, which was our goal anyway. And I think that we traced that path, like I said, through Mesoamerica with these fallen seraphim. I think we traced that path, through a lot of the false religious ideas that we see in the New Age movement. That these are spiritual influences that are driving this stuff. The Bible tells us that our battle's not against flesh and blood, but against, the spirits. And so I think that was really the trajectory, and I think we did, get on their path and show how they really have been influencing this world, in the indigenous tribes in America and all over for a long time, and how, we think that's going to play out in biblical prophecy, in this great deception, and then in God using them as part of the judgment against the fallen world. So in that sense, yeah, I think we did get on their path, and we did kind of show the trajectory there.
Right. And I think there's a healthy, if I can use that word, overlap with some of the previous work you and Tom have done with, the Petrus Romanus and Exo-Vaticana with, I know you posted a link to an article a day or so ago, suggesting, one person suggesting that Pope Francis is going to announce, ET reality, in the next week or something. Which
June 15th.
If that happens, that'll be interesting.
That happens to be my birthday, which I found a little troubling. But yeah, there's an article on the internet now, and I kind of reposted about it on my website. I think I did it on Supernatural Worldview, but my other website is logosapologia.org. I'm sure you guys will link to those for me. But there's an attorney named Daniel Sheehan, kind of white curly-haired guy, and I quoted him in Exo-Vaticana because he's a rather famous attorney. He's tried some really high-profile cases, and he's well-known. He's also well-known in the UFO community because he's kind of at the cutting edge of what they call the disclosure movement. He really does believe that there are intelligent extraterrestrials influencing the Earth, and I would question some of his beliefs there, but he's also into this real New Age spirituality and whatnot, and so that always kind of throws up a lot of red flags for me too. But he is a serious attorney. He's a serious person. He does have a prominent career, and he was the lead counsel for the Jesuit order in the United States. So he has definite inside connections to the Vatican and the Jesuit order in particular. Pope Francis being the first Jesuit pope, it could be quite significant. He spoke at this UFO conference in California. It was called Contact in the Desert. I believe that was just like last weekend. When he spoke, he said that on June 15th, Pope Francis is going to announce that they're preparing the way for the arrival of some kind of super intelligent extraterrestrial. Right. Now, I don't know what to make of that. Does Sheehan know what he's talking about, or is he just, blowing smoke to attract attention to himself? I don't know. It could be either way. It could be kind of in the middle of that. I suspect that, I've seen the Vorg astronomers, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, acronym VORG, go out, and several of them, have been making comments about baptizing extraterrestrials. Pope Francis last year mentioned that he would baptize an extraterrestrial. He was the first pope to ever say it, but they've been saying it since 1993, as far as I can tell. When I traced that back in Exo-Vaticana, the first astronomer was George Cognier, who was then the leader of the VORG. He said that they were teaming up with NASA to find ETs and see if they would baptize them into the Catholic Church. That was way back in 93 when the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope first went online on Mount Graham. Now, in case some of the listeners don't know, the reason why this connects to Exo-Vaticana is that, we discovered that the indigenous tribes view Mount Graham, where the Vatican has this observatory, as a portal area. And so this kind of opens up a whole new rationale for why they might be up there. Maybe it's more than just a good place to look at the stars. And, the Indians seem to think that it's a portal. And, they're very concerned about them being up there. So, what about Sedona? Well, interesting to me is that all around Sedona, on these red rock formations, the New Agers call these energy vortexes. And when they say energy vortex, they mean something along the lines of spiritual energy, what the Chinese call qi energy, like and with qi, you have like feng shui on one end, which is the arrangement of your furniture and your architecture and where you put your house on the land, to direct qi energy, okay? Well, in a personal way, acupuncture is a way that you direct qi energy inside a person. So the Chinese have this belief. In some of the New Age literature, some of the occult literature, you see things like ley lines. They think are channels of this earth energy. It's the same sort of thing. Well, in Sedona, there was a psychic medium named Paige Bryant. In 1981, she channeled a being called Albion, who I would probably identify as a demonic entity, who claimed, to be this spiritual master, blah, blah, blah. But he had Paige Bryant identify these vortex areas all around Sedona. And a vortex is just kind of a fancy word for a spiral energy thing, like water going down the drain or, a tornado or whatnot. Well, so they have these spiritual vortex areas where they go to meditate, and these are on these red rock formations, Bell Rock being one, Airport Mesa being another. And I've visited these areas, and I got some film footage of them and talked about them. But interesting enough to me, the Catholic Church seems to have been aware of this before the New Age movement ever got started and before she ever identified them. Because one of the main vortex areas now is the Chapel of the Holy Cross, and it's built into the side of the mountain up there in Sedona, overlooking the city. You see this Catholic chapel. It was built in the 1950s, called the Chapel of the Holy Cross, and all the New Agers say that's the best place for soul projection. What do they mean by that? Well, you go up there and you sit next to the chapel or in it, and you do your little lotus position, and you go within, and you can project your soul all across to any of the other vortex sites in Savannah. And there's instructions for how to do that if you want to, delve into the New Age literature. And I looked at that, and I talk about it in the book. But it's really interesting to me that the Catholic Church seems to be one step ahead of the New Age movement, building their little chapel up on the Red Rocks. And see, this again, just like at Mount Graham, they had to bypass, a lot of the typical environmental regulations and whatnot. They wouldn't allow you to build a Baptist church on the Red Rock formations of Sedona, would they? Now, why does the Vatican get such special privileges? Why is it that Senator John McCain went around the National Forestry Service and the whole approval process of the United States Congress to rubber stamp the Vatican building an observatory on top of Mount Graham, bypassing every single environmental regulation and every Forestry Service process? They just rubber stamped it. Bam, go ahead, build it. No oversight whatsoever. And this is unheard of. That you can just go build a facility in a national park without any oversight. But somehow the Vatican's able to do that, over and over again. I don't know how they do that, but I suspect they have high-ranking Catholics, involved in the process who just kind of push that through.
Now, do you think there's actual positive sort of benefits to some of that stuff? I mean, I know it's kind of to the Christian, it's kind of like, no, there's no, it's all demonic, it's all evil. But in terms of like the natural sort of the way God intended creation to be sort of thing, do you think there's any kind of nuggets of truth in there that have been, manipulated and changed?
I suspect so. Yeah, I suspect there is. I think that, things like meditation and mindfulness, there probably is a positive benefit to it, especially the idea of mindfulness. If you look at what it's really supposed to be, you're just making yourself aware of your own thoughts. And, I think that you could look at what Paul says, take every thought captive. Well, isn't that mindfulness? I think it is. But, what Paul's talking about is, be aware of your thoughts. And, this is anybody who is a Christian that should be aware of this, and they should be able to identify with what I'm saying. If you're a Christian and you're in this process we call sanctification, that means you're struggling with sin. That means you're struggling with desires that you have that you don't want to actually do. Now, if you're like me, that happens fairly frequently. And that means that when that thought pops in your mind, you have a choice. Do I capture this thought and push it out of my mind, or do I roll around and play with it and think about how good it might feel or whatever if I commit this sin? Well, what Paul's saying is you capture that thought and you push it out of your mind, because if you roll around with it long enough, you're going to do it. If you sit in the barber shop long enough, you're going to get a haircut, that kind of thinking. So if you allow these thoughts to roll around in your mind long enough, you're going to act on it, okay? And this could be lust, it could be greed, it could be, any kind of sinful inclination that all of us struggle with as human beings. And Christians are not, we don't get a free pass on this struggle. We all have to struggle. So this is, I think, is the idea behind mindfulness is a similar sort of thing, in that you're becoming aware of your own thinking and you're capturing it and you're dealing with it. Now, in mindfulness and Buddhist kind of things, it's a little different, because they don't necessarily make a moral judgment about it and do anything about it. They just kind of, there it is, let's observe it, and I think that would be the difference. A lot of times they're talking about emptying yourself, clearing your mind, and the reason they're doing that is so they can discover the divinity within you. They have this belief that we're all part of God and we've all just gotten split off. It's this pantheistic oneism. I talk a lot about oneism in my book, The Supernatural Worldview, this idea that all is one. It really is pantheism, in that we are all God. We just got broken apart, and really our challenge is just to discover that we are God. And once we do that, we will, achieve the status of God. Basically, we'll become one part of the whole, nirvana, or Atman is Brahman, all these kind of Eastern ideas that are, ubiquitous in the New Age literature as well, and probably the dominant spirituality in America now, whether people know it or not, is this onist idea. The idea that all religions are basically praying to the same God. It's all connected to oneism. And, that's the problem, is that they really think that they're part of God or God is within them. And we don't believe that. We believe that God is external to us. We believe in twoism. There's two separate things. Apostle Paul says in Romans 1:25, that they worship created things rather than the Creator, and that's the problem, is people don't make that distinction. We are created things. We are not the Creator. The Creator is not, within your consciousness, and if you just kind of clear your mind enough, you'll discover that you're God. That's the message of the New Age. That's the message of, Buddhist meditation, of Hinduism, and that's where the distinction lies, and that's where the danger is with this practice, is we don't want to empty our minds. We want to fill our minds with the Word of God, with the things of God, with holiness. We want to capture those thoughts and push those sinful inclinations out and replace them with, God's will for us. And, that's a challenge. But, if you're not doing it, you're probably sliding backwards, because nobody really coasts uphill, and the Christian life is an uphill struggle.
Amen, brother. I think that's a great way to land the plane here. That's awesome.
All right. Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Well, so, was there any last words that you wanted to add on to that for the folks at home?
Well, I think that is a good place to end, and, just to be real clear, we are Christians, and Tom, is a pastor for 25 years before he started this enterprise that he's in now, and, I came to Christianity later in life, so I might be struggling a little more than some of the others, but it is an uphill battle, and we're called to come together and to do these things, and I take this calling seriously. I'm trying to handle this information with integrity, and I think it's important that we do pay attention. I don't know when Jesus is going to return. I don't know when the end times are, but I suspect that it could be soon. And, I think there are good reasons to believe that, and that's what we write about. And, I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but look at what's going on in the world, and it is kind of alarming. And, if you don't find it alarming, I don't know why you don't, because I do. And, I think that, keep looking up, because your redemption is near.
Amen.
Boom. Well, there you have it, folks. Cris, thanks again for coming on the show, buddy. You're always welcome.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Hopefully we'll get to cross paths again soon.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell us about your book and where to find it and where to buy it and look at all your stuff again?
Certainly. So my websites are www.supernaturalworldview.com, and then Logos Apologia is the other one. And I don't know what I was thinking when I named it that, because I wasn't really thinking about people being able to remember it really well, but it's LOGOSAPOLOGIA.org. It's really two Greek words, logos and apologia, so it's like logic, or the word, and defense is apologia, so that's where it came from. But those are the two websites. And then the book is available at Amazon, of course. Right now, the book is so new that they won't allow me to list it on Amazon personally through my Amazon store. But I'm going to be offering some signed copies of the book through my Amazon store as soon as they'll let me list it. And, of course, it's available at survivalmall.com, which is Tom's website. And I think he has some kind of special running, too. And, of course, it's at Barnes & Nobles and a lot of those standard bookstores as well. So, it's really a privilege to have it out there and available for everybody in so many different outlets. And, it should be pretty easy to get a copy. But if you want a signed one, you can do that through me.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Our good friend of the show, Cris Putnam, with his new thing. Hope you liked it. A lot of stuff packed in there. A lot of ancient serpent talk,
Yeah, Native American portals.
Native American portals.
Oh, and something I forgot to mention, and I didn't have a chance really, but the whole idea of Sedona, is very similar to Sidonia, which has ties with Mars, and you know how it's red out there. So, there's some interesting ties with that. Which David Flynn pointed out has a connection with the dog star Sirius, so it gets totally serious, bro.
That is some serious business. So there you go. Anyways, hope everybody liked it. Make sure to go to our Facebook page, become my friend, Basil, Gon's friends, Gon's, and Canary Cry Radio. Also, we got our Twitter, Canary Cry Radio, Instagram, Canary Cry Radio. If you'd like to help Canary Cry Radio continue the mission of spreading the word, you can go to canarycryradio.com, and there's a support tab there. And there, you can sign up to do a monthly gift subscription. It's great, automatic, perfect for your laid-back bachelor lifestyle. But if commitment's not your thing, you can make a one-time gift in any amount. We appreciate that so much. You guys are keeping cat food in our cats' bellies. Gon's recently got attacked by bats. He was in a field and he thought it was a butterfly, but it turned out it was a bat.
Yeah, it was an MK Ultra situation. You know,
and he got attacked. He didn't get hurt. He's not hurt. He just is really emotionally scarred. So we need to buy him a box set of Friends. Friends, the box set, so we can help him out.
The TV show, so I can watch.
Yes, so if you want to help Gonz out with that, or help me feed my cat, you can go ahead and go to the support tab. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Which, by the way, the cat does make an appearance in the episode. By the way, I think it might be its debut.
Yeah. Many of you noticed in the middle of the episode there was a large crashing sound. That was the cat pouncing on my headset, thinking that it was a creature attacking me, and he was just trying to help, but it did cause a little bit of a ruckus.
But Chris was good. He just
I was going to say, I don't even know if Chris noticed.
Yeah, he was just like...
He just went right through it.
Yeah.
So there you go. Okay, also, one last thing is go to iTunes, everybody. Go to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Not a lot of you have been doing that lately. I'm a little bit sad about that. You know, we had the Memorial Day episode. We put a lot of work into it. Gon spent 80,000 hours editing it. We did it. We did it. And we haven't gotten any iTunes reviews or ratings or anything.
Well, that's normally how it works. It's okay, Basil. Every time we have an episode that I spend, hours upon hours and, just way too much effort into one episode, and it comes out and it's like crickets. Yep. And then, you'll get your occasional 6 months down the line, oh, I love that episode. And it's like, payoff.
This outro is really just becoming a gripe session here.
Yeah, we're just bitter about our lives.
Did you see Chappie?
I did see Chappie, yeah.
What did you think about it? Do you want to do a review of Chappie right now?
Just right now? I
didn't see it. I want to see it.
Yeah, I actually was going to do a full YouTube video review of it, but I just haven't gotten around to it because I didn't think it wasn't that deep, number one. It's kind of like a remake of Short Circuit, but in sort of a modern perspective.
Right.
And basically what I felt like it was the main topic at play here was not artificial intelligence per se. It was mind uploading into machines, and the what Transcendence did in sort of a psychological thriller kind of way, Chappie did in the more action packed, action movie sequence kind of way. Right. And it kind of plays on a couple of themes with the creator of Chappie sort of playing the god figure, giving him some rules, to whatever. And then Chappie tries to follow the rules, but the other, criminals that they're hanging out with, forces him to, because they want him to go to war and all this stuff. And eventually he breaks those rules, and he's kind of a, killer robot kind of guy, but he's trying to defend his own sort of robot humanity or whatever. And I would say it was just kind of propaganda for that sort of thinking. There's a scene where Chappie's arm gets ripped off by the Hugh, what's his name?
Hugh Grant.
No, not Hugh Grant. Wolverine.
Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Jackman.
Hugh Grant.
Hugh Grant. No, not Hugh Grant. The Hugh Jackman character, rips out Chappie's arm, and it's like this horrific imagery, and it's, it tugs at your humanness, like, oh my gosh, they're hurting him. And I had to even catch myself like, oh my gosh, that's so sad and terrible. But then it's like, wait a minute, but that's a robot. That's a machine. It's not really.
You can't feel a robot.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's what they're trying to implant into the minds of the people. It's like, oh, what is it to be human or conscious?
As Chappie was dying, did he slowly go, I was just learning to love?
No, not quite. But his body was going to run out of batteries, so they had to transfer him over to a new body, and they do that successfully. And his creator guy also was dying, and they did this whole transmind whatever into a robot body. So the human lives by transferring his consciousness into the same kind of robot machine body. And then
now I don't have to see the movie.
No, you don't. You really don't. It's really
neither
not
does
that
anybody.
Good. No, don't go see it. It's really not that good. And then what's that lady, that chick name, Antwood something or other?
Di Antwoord,
yeah. So she's
I don't
in the
know
movie.
Her name, but she
kind of plays like the motherly figure of Chappie, and then she gets shot, and it's this whole sad scene. But Chappie was so smart because he figured out how to keep the data of his quote unquote mommy on some like flash drive or something. They get the flash drive to some facility at the end, and the Di Antwoord character, the motherly figure, wakes up in a robot machine, and that's how the movie ends. So it's like
everybody becomes robots?
Yeah.
The whole thing is just everybody becoming robots.
Yeah. So I'm telling you, it's just propaganda for that whole idea of like, yeah, we're going to, upload our minds into machines and we're going to live forever. And it's like,
sounds good to me.
Same kind of nonsense that, and this comes, and just, I'm posting a video about this today, which if you're listening to this, whenever, it's probably been days or whatever, but there was a Christian Post article that published an article that said, why Christians should embrace transhumanism. And, I kind of threw up in my mouth reading it.
That's gross.
Yeah, it was bad.
Did a little bit come out onto your computer?
Pretty much. I'm just recording. My video is just me. Just
Hey everybody, I'm just I'm doing a video on this article called "Should Christians be in?"
That is so highly inappropriate, Basil.
Are we still? Is this like recording to be on a thing, or are we just talking?
Idea.
Okay.
All right, I think we should wrap it up before we get ourselves into trouble.
I've been getting dressed the whole time talking about Chappie.
Dressed. Interesting. Yeah, just so, talking about getting in trouble, our next episode might get us in trouble. So just stay tuned.
Yeah. Okay, bye.
Are you gonna do a real outro, or are you gonna
get out of here? I'm just trying to leave. I thought I did a real outro.
Okay, you're gonna use that?
Oh no, I'll do this. So there you have it, folks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Radio. Bleep or bloop. Make sure to tune in next time. But until you do, think outside that cage. Yeah?
Yeah.
Alright, I gotta go.
Alright.
Alright, talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.